Brace yourself for a bone-chilling journey into darkness as an innocent hitchhiker's fateful encounter takes a nightmarish turn. Uncover the spine-tingling truth behind the open road's most sinister secrets in this hair-raising tale of terror. My biggest mistake as a college student was spending all the money I was saving for a bus ticket home on various other things throughout the semester. When it was time to go home, I found myself without enough money for the bus fare. This was in 2010, long before Venmo or other money transfer apps existed. I couldn't ask my parents for financial help. I was desperate. My only option seems to be to go home, and I hope someone will be kind enough to give me a lift. After walking about 3 miles, luck was on my side, and a blue Toyota Camry pulled up. The driver, a friendly guy named Mark, was driving towards my hometown Bayside, and was more than happy to help me. I carried my bags in the back seat before sitting in the passenger seat. We had a short chat during the 2-hour drive, and I learned that Mark graduated from the same college as me, which created a sense of camaraderie. Nevertheless, I remained careful and alert, knowing full well that it was still strange. As we approached Bayside, Mark asked to enter my address into his GPS. Even though my brain told me it was a normal request, my intuition sent a warning signal. I hesitated and suggested he drive me to a nearby gas station where I could call my family for a ride. Surprisingly, Mark became agitated, demanding an explanation for my reluctance to share my address. Feeling uncomfortable, I tried to reach the doorknob, whereupon I realized he had locked the doors. Panic set in, but I was able to open the door using the internal mechanism and quickly jumped out of the car. Mark yelled after me, threatening to find me, but I ran into the nearby woods, leaving my luggage behind. I hid in the woods for what seemed like an eternity as darkness fell. I knew I had to find a way home, so I gathered up the courage to get back on the road. Fortunately, Mark's car was not in sight. I started walking along the road, and after a while I came across a convenience store where I could use the phone. I called the police and my parents, who in turn called our neighbor to borrow their car and pick me up. The police were concerned but acknowledged the limitations of the situation. They could not retrieve my belongings but emphasized the dangers of hiking. This incident was a hard lesson for me, as it reminded me of the dangers associated with trusting strangers, especially when hiking. I learned to be more responsible with my money and to prioritize my safety above all else. Looking back on that terrifying experience in 2010, I'm grateful I escaped unharmed, and it serves as a reminder to be careful and vigilant in unfamiliar situations. In the year 2016, I had finally reached my breaking point with the freezing winters of the Rocky Mountains. Ever since I was a teenager, I had been an ardent fan of Alex Turner's music, with occasional detours to enjoy bands like Fleetwood Mac. His songs about distant lands, thrilling escapades, and peculiar characters had filled my imagination, fueling my desire for adventure beyond the icy confines of the mountains. Filled with dreams of exploring tropical paradises, I made a bold decision to leave everything behind and hitchhike my way to Miami, Florida, the city that inspired many of Alex Turner's songs. Looking back now, after 7 years of life's experiences, I can admit how foolish I was, and I've heard my fair share of teasing about it over the years. But let's focus on the story and those quirky moments along the journey. As I traveled through various states like New Mexico and Oklahoma, I had my fair share of amusing encounters, like the time I was picked up by a laid-back hippie named Tim, driving an old VW bus in New Mexico. Those were lighthearted memories, though not what this tale is about. Somewhere along the way, during a pit stop in Arkansas, I heard about the legend of the Ouachita Ogre, a fascinating piece of local folklore. Moving forward, my hitchhiking adventure brought me to South Texas, an interstate town where I faced an unexpected challenge. To get from Corpus Christi to Houston, I had to traverse a colossal bridge called the Lone Star Link, extending for 18 miles over marshlands and swamps. Hitchhiking across it was no easy task, as police were vigilant in apprehending pedestrians attempting to cross. I found myself stranded for hours on the Corpus Christi side, desperately trying to hitch a ride across. Finally, a white SUV pulled up, and as I approached, I noticed an elderly man, probably in his late 60s or early 70s, sitting inside. He was quite heavy-set, wearing nothing but shorts, which seemed a bit odd. I got in, grateful for the ride, as "Island in the Sun" by Weezer played on the radio. Little did I know that this song would forever lose its charm after the events that followed. As we drove across the seemingly never-ending bridge, the man began to make me feel uneasy. Speaking with a thick Cajun accent, he started asking inappropriate questions about my personal life. It was clear he was fixated on something else, making me feel like prey being stalked by a predator. "How big are you, son?" he asked with a disturbing grin. "I'm sorry, but that's not something I'm going to discuss," I replied, trying to avoid his unsettling gaze. He persisted, asking to see what he was inquiring about. It was obvious that he had some twisted intentions, and my heart raced with fear. I declined, rejecting his advances, but he wouldn't let it go. "I'd love to take you into the swamps, just for a little while," he said with a creepy undertone. "No way," I protested, feeling trapped and powerless in the confined space of the vehicle. As we continued across the bridge, the man's disturbing fantasies became clearer, and I couldn't help but fear what he might do if he got his way. My mind raced with grim possibilities, imagining scenarios that involved being stranded in the swamp, defenseless against this man's sinister desires. It felt like a horror movie playing out in real life, with the swamps as the backdrop for this dreadful encounter. Summoning all my courage, I firmly declined his advances and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with his dark plans. Thankfully, I survived the ordeal, and when we finally reached the other side of the bridge, I was relieved to step out of that vehicle and onto solid ground. I thanked him with a shaky voice and watched as he drove away, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief that I had escaped unharmed. My journey continued for several more days, until I eventually found myself in Gulfport, Mississippi. Along the way, I encountered another unsettling situation in Baton Rouge, where a couple offered me a place to stay for the night. Exhausted and in need of rest, I hesitantly accepted their offer, unsure of what their true intentions might be. As I think back on those perilous days, I realize how fortunate I am to have made it through those treacherous encounters. It was a journey filled with thrilling highs and chilling lows, and I'll forever be grateful for the wisdom and experience those escapades bestowed upon me. And even though I now live in the warmth of the southern coast, I can't help but chuckle at my naivete back then. Life has a way of humbling us, but it's those very lessons that shape who we become. It was about 6 years ago, during the summer of 2017, that my best friend and I embarked on an adventurous hitchhiking trip across Eastern Europe. At the age of 19, we embraced a carefree, vagabond lifestyle, traversing from one city to another with no money to our names. Looking back now, we've outgrown that phase, but the memories of one particular night will stay with us forever. Our journey had taken us from the Baltics into Lithuania, where we found ourselves hitching a ride from the Latvian border. The kind driver dropped us off at a desolate spot, seemingly ideal for hitchhikers, a concrete area beside the road in the heart of the Lithuanian countryside, perhaps intended for resting truckers. To one side lay vast cornfields, and on the other, a dense forest. As night fell and the traffic dwindled, we decided to call it a day. Setting up our sleeping bags and meager supplies by a small dirt mound near the road, we were ready to rest when we heard a woman's desperate screams coming from across the street. Reacting instinctively, we rushed over and glimpsed two men fleeing into the cornfields. Soon after, a car sped away from the scene, leaving us puzzled and alarmed. Not long after, a local policeman arrived and questioned us in Lithuanian. Explaining in English that we were merely hitchhikers, we were advised that the area was hazardous and that we shouldn't stay there. The officer then left, leaving us uneasy as we returned to our sleeping spot on the edge of the woods. Aware of the potential danger, my friend took out a small, rusty pocket knife for protection, and we remained on high alert. In the dead of night, we heard footsteps and rustling branches in the woods nearby. The sounds drew nearer and halted close to us, followed by hushed whispers. We knew then that someone was watching us, and the fear paralyzed us. Clutching the pocket knife tightly, we lay there in silence, fully aware of the grave danger we were in. Hours passed, with the unnerving presence lurking in the darkness, but nothing happened. Exhausted and terrified, we took turns keeping watch before eventually succumbing to exhaustion and drifting off to sleep. The morning sun woke us up, and as we opened our eyes, a car screeched to a halt on the road beside the mound where we lay. Our hearts pounded as we felt the car's occupants draw near, almost touching us. We couldn't see them, but the tension was palpable. An intense argument between two men erupted, lasting what felt like an eternity before they stormed back to their car and drove away. The relief was overwhelming, and we wasted no time in grabbing our bags, putting distance between us and that haunting location as we continued hitchhiking. To this day, we remain uncertain about the events of that eerie night. It seemed like we stumbled upon something sinister, perhaps a murder, and narrowly escaped becoming victims ourselves. The memory of that fateful night in Lithuania still haunts us. We shudder to think what might have happened if fate hadn't intervened. Strangely, our night of terror was foreshadowed by a bizarre incident earlier. While sitting on a wall near the Lithuanian-Latvian border, we witnessed a peculiar scene involving seemingly unconscious police officers and a shouting passerby. It was as if they vanished into thin air after just a few seconds, leaving us perplexed. Little did we know that it was only the beginning of an even more surreal and dangerous night ahead. Though time has passed since that harrowing experience, the memory remains vivid and serves as a constant reminder of how fragile and unpredictable life can be. We're grateful to have escaped unharmed, knowing that we could have easily ended up as mere echoes of the past, forgotten in an unknown Lithuanian forest.